Hello everybody, and welcome back to Boss Battles of Wraeclast, the somewhat comprehensive guide to the various bosses in Path of Exile 2. In today's episode we have the Final Act Boss Edition. We are taking on the final boss of Act 1, and before we get started on anything to do with this boss, I just want to say that this boss fight is my favourite boss fight of any game I've ever played, ever. Full stop, period, no more questions. Everything from the atmosphere, to the mechanics, to the music, the voice acting. Whoever voice acted this boss fight needs a raise immediately because they did an amazing job of putting across the madness that is the Mad Wolf of Ogham. And yeah, absolutely amazing boss fight. I absolutely love it to death. It's my favourite boss from any game I've ever played. Anyway, without further ado, we are looking for Count Geonor, or Count Geonor? Count Geonor? I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce his name. I really should pay closer attention to the NPCs in Clearfell Encampment when they're talking to me about certain bosses, because, yeah, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I've always called him Count Geonor, so we'll just stick with that. Now, Count Geonor can be located at the end of the Ogham Manor. Now, with Ogham Manor, there are 3 separate levels to that zone. You have to go down sets of stairs to get to the next level. On every single level, you'll notice you can see this kind of open area with a mining pit at the bottom. You'll see some miners working away, digging holes. You'll see a cage with the beast inside with his red tentacles pulling corpses apart and eating them. You'll see the Count and the Witch sat on these kind of thrones on this raised platform next to that pit. And then when you get to the 3rd level, at the end of that level you'll see an elevator that I believe it has the word arena written on it, and when you click on that elevator it will lower you into the boss fight arena. You'll have to clear out the miners because they are enemies as well, and then the boss fight itself will start. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on with the boss fight. This is going to be quite a long one. This is probably going to be about 10 to 15 minutes in length, so just so you're aware, this boss fight can drag on, especially considering I want to showcase his abilities in full and explain them, so there will be moments where I'm either not saying anything or we will have to go into a bit of an in-depth explanation as to what's going on. Anyway, without further ado, here is Count Geonor. Okay, here is the boss arena. There's the checkpoint, that's where you'll respawn if you die throughout this fight. There is the mining pit with the miners and the beast in its cage eating a corpse, and the Count and the Witch sat on their thrones in the top left. There is the elevator with arena. Once you click on the elevator, your character will automatically step onto it and then you'll get lowered down. And then when you step off the elevator, those miners digging with their shovels will turn into enemies, so you will need to kill those before you can do the boss. And then there'll be a few voice lines, the boss will jump down from his throne and the fight will start. After killing these miners, when you step into the middle of the room, your perspective will zoom out so you can see the boss sat up there. But when the fight starts, that perspective will go back to normal, so don't worry about it, you're not going to be fighting it zoomed out. Now, this boss has 2 separate phases, and in phase 1 he has 2 different forms, his human and his wolf form. He has a variety of different melee attacks in phase 1. He'll have his standard weapon combos where he's just kind of swinging around. He will also knock you about when he's hitting you with those attacks. But he does also have a couple of different heavy attacks. He has a charge attack right there where he will charge in a straight line at your character. If he catches you with that attack, he will pin you against the wall. And then after he pins you against the wall, or if he misses you, after he hits the wall, he will then do a wide swing with his sword, which leaves this kind of frost-chilled ground on the floor. That does hit incredibly hard, so make sure you're trying to avoid that dodge roll. I find it very difficult to avoid. Even if I dodge roll or stay away, you still kind of get caught by it, and it does hit pretty hard, so yeah, make sure you're avoiding that if you can. His second heavy attack is a thrusting attack, and it has a similar animation to the first one, so he will ready his sword by his side, he'll thrust it forward, and you'll notice a frost bolt appear from the tip of his sword, which will fire out in a straight line at your character. That frost bolt has a high chance of freezing, and it will chill you if it does hit. It also does some damage, so make sure you're avoiding that. Again, every time you see him do a heavy attack in his human form, just dodge roll left or right, and you will avoid them. In his wolf form, he has a variety of different abilities, and they're all different from his first ones. So what he'll do is, when he goes into wolf form, he'll slam his sword into the ground, and it will have a small circle of frost around it. But the longer that sword is in the ground, the larger that circle of frost will grow. I believe it gets 3 or 4 different stages. There you go, you can see the frost circle on the floor with some runes around it, and it will grow steadily throughout this part of the fight. If you step into that frost circle, it has a very high chance of freezing you, so be careful stepping near that one. He has a few different heavy attacks in this phase. When he's in wolf form, he will summon pools of blood on the floor. If those pools of blood are kind of scattered around with little blood lines leading to them, after a few seconds they will turn into wolves, which you'll need to kill. If he summons the 3 pools of blood in a straight line in front of him, he will then, very shortly after that, he will charge forward in his wolf form, and those pools of blood will fire bolts of blood in a sideways angle from where you're stood. So if he's summoned them in a straight line forward, he will charge through them, and they will fire at a 90-degree angle when he charges through them. So make sure you're stood in between the pools of blood to make sure you avoid being hit by those bolts. And then his third heavy attack in wolf form, he will kind of jump up into the roof, but he kind of looks like he dematerializes into blood. And then shortly after that, he will slam into the ground on your character. You'll notice a big red circle around your character. So every time he's in wolf form, if you see him kind of disappear upwards, you need to make sure you're moving constantly, because that slam attack hits incredibly hard. When you hit phase 2, he will turn into the putrid wolf, which is kind of this half man, half wolf amalgamation with tentacles, and he's still using his sword as well. Now throughout this phase, he will have this kind of mist effect, so he'll summon this big cloud of mist, and it'll be a circle in the middle of the room where you can stand. You can stand in that mist, but I wouldn't recommend it, because he will summon adds throughout this phase. Make sure you're killing off those adds, and one thing you'll also notice as well is that the boss is charging at our character throughout this phase as well. He's also got some pretty cool voice lines, and the music sounds amazing. This is one of the best parts of the fight, so I would highly recommend paying attention to it when it happens. I won't be talking through the future ones, so you can actually see those. They're amazing. Now, one of the tricks to that part of the fight, when he summons that circle of mist and you're stood in the centre, if you want to avoid being hit by the charges, or to make it easier to avoid them, stand on one side of the open circle in the middle of the room. Then the boss will charge at you from the same direction every single time, but he will also charge at you from the opposite side of the circle, so you get the most amount of time to dodge that attack. I learnt this the very first time I took the boss on. If you stood on one side of that circle, he will always charge at you from the same side, so you can easily see him coming and avoid it a lot easier. If you stand in the middle of the room, you're more likely to get hit by that charge attack, and it will hit very hard. So yeah, I definitely recommend standing on one side of that circle and making sure you're taking on the adds and killing them as well. They'll help you recharge some flasks, but they can overwhelm you if there's more than a few of them. Now in this phase 2, you'll notice he is still using his leap slam attack, so he's still kind of dematerializing into a cloud of blood and then slamming into the ground on your character. So again, make sure you're paying attention when the boss seems to kind of turn into blood and disappear. Make sure you are constantly moving and getting out of that red circle.
They wither and tarry, forsaken frosts, as cold as death. Of Bay's misery, the pack won't forget. I will take out your heart.
Now, in this phase, he does also have 3 other main attacks that you need to pay attention to. There is this one here, where he will slam his sword into the ground. You'll then notice that there's this kind of expanding chill effect on the floor that has these frost crystals appearing in various different locations. Try and stand in between those frost crystals, because about 5 to 10 seconds after he starts doing that, that whole shield area will explode, and those crystals will explode as well. So if you're stood in between those crystals and not near them, you'll be absolutely fine. You can see the patches of frost on the floor there, and they all kind of summon these big spikes. But if you're stood away from those kind of frosty patches, you'll be absolutely fine. He also has an attack where he will point his sword at the ceiling, and he'll summon 4 strikes of these kind of frost beams from the ceiling, which do hit very hard, and they are randomly appearing around the room, but you'll always have a few spawn near your character. So again, make sure that when he is doing that attack that you're paying attention to where those beams of frost are going to hit, and that you're moving to a point where there aren't any, so you don't get hit by it. Getting hit by one isn't too bad, it doesn't hit very hard, but if you get chained by them and you get slowed by them, it does make it very hard to avoid all of them. and when the boss drops below 30% health, they will be infused with blood and deal extra fizz and chaos damage as well. So yeah, you need to make sure you're avoiding those beams of frost as much as possible. And finally, his third attack is that frost breath attack. He will just kind of breathe this frost attack in a small cone in front of him. So as soon as you see him start doing that, make sure you're dodging and getting out of the way. Again, it doesn't hit very hard, but if you get caught in that attack, it will chill and slow you, so you might get caught by the whole thing, which can be quite dangerous.
Cursed or gifted, branded and afflicted, your veins soon chilled, and shall slay again. Solstice of pain.
There are the frost beam attacks. Again, I'm always looking for an area where there aren't any frost beams. There was the jump slam attack that he does with the red circle, and as you can see, it hit me for about 80% of my health, so it is a very heavy hit, so you need to make sure you avoid that at all costs. There is the frost channel attack with the patches of frost on the ground that turn into crystals. He does also have a standard jumping attack, as you saw just there, where you'll kind of notice one of his hands kind of places on the floor, and then he just jumps forward at your character, or where your character was stood. So again, when you see him do that, just keep moving.
Your pulse quickens. The eternal impure, with bloodlust empowered. Our Esamir endured, but soon all were devoured. In unending war, death waited at the door. Then hour by hour, men fell as summer soured.
There we go, you can see the kind of frost beam attacks that he's summoning with his sword pointed at the roof. They have those blood infusions on them. Now, one thing, when you notice that attack change to the kind of blood infused version, you'll also notice that every 10 to 15 seconds throughout the rest of the fight, it will randomly summon those. Only once, but you will still have to pay attention to them because they will hit harder with them being infused with extra damage. The room doesn't fill up with as many of them when it does them randomly throughout the phase, so if he's not doing the specific attack that summons those beams, there won't be as many of them. You'll have more spaces to stand in to avoid being hit by it, but it is still dangerous, and it will still do it throughout this mist phase as well.
Tortured under the moon, the pack suffered but endured, and howled now in tune. No tales were told, none new, none old, and their endless hunger grew ever stronger. I smell your blood, and I am ravenous. Freezing.
He will also use that kind of wide arc swing attack from phase 1 after the charge attack. So again, it doesn't fill up the whole room, so you do have plenty of spaces to avoid it, but sometimes he'll catch you off guard with it, so it can be quite dangerous. But if you keep working away, you will be able to slowly chip away at his health and take him down. This fight did take a lot longer than every other time I've killed him, but again, like I said, I wanted to make sure that we had enough of a showcase of the abilities so you could see how they change throughout the fight.
It consumed my being. Oriana used it against me.
Where has she taken the beast?
I found messages from the desert.
From the Vastiri?
Yes.
You'll notice the hooded ones show up as well at the end of the fight and have some voice lines with the wolf or the boss. And if you played Path of Exile 1, you'll probably recognise what happens when the hooded one first appears. and then he will kill the boss for you. And 90% of the time when you kill the boss, you will get an Exalted Orb drop, and pretty much every single time I've killed him, I've always had an Exalted Orb, but sometimes you'll be unlucky and you won't get it. But that is pretty much everything. You'll then need to head back to Clearfell Encampment, and you can then move on to Act 2. But yeah, that is the Mad Wolf of Ogham. Thank you everybody for watching, and I shall catch you in the next episode.